Welcome to the Authority File, the podcast where you'll hear conversations with academic librarians, technologists, researchers, and authors whose work is laying the foundation for higher education's future. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. In this four-part series, which is brought to you with support from Wilfrid Laurier University Press, we'll be speaking with the co-editors of the new book, The Contemporary Leonard Cohen, Response, Reappraisal, and Rediscovery. Kate Pinder, Associate Professor in the Department of English and Theatre at Acadia University, where she teaches Canadian Literature and Literary Theory, and Joel Deshay, Associate Professor of Canadian Literature and Film at Memorial University in St. John's, Newfoundland, joined my colleague and Choice's digital media producer Sabrina Kofer to discuss the Canadian musician, poet, and novelist Leonard Cohen. The book examines Cohen as an artist through a contemporary lens, allowing contributors a chance to, as the book's subtitle notes, reappraise and rediscover his creative output and influence in a post-20th century context. Sabrina, Kate, and Joel talk about how the book came together and take time to explain several of Cohen's works and show how a contemporary critical stance on Cohen illuminates his work in a very different light. In this first episode, Sabrina, Kate, and Joel tell the story of the book's origin and how it uses contemporary thinking to frame Cohen's work.
Okay, Joel and Kate, welcome to the program.
Hi.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Yeah. So to start, how did the two of you come together to edit the volume and what inspired it? And Kate, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So the volume started in the form that it eventually took in the book, really out of a conference panel that I organized for the Association of Canadian and Quebec Literatures right after Cohen's death. So Cohen died in 2016, and pretty soon after that, there was a call for papers, for panels for the upcoming conference the next year. And I thought that would be a good moment to look back on Cohen's career, because there had been a lot of scholarship on Cohen in his sort of earlier 1960s works, but not a lot since his recovery and his new phase of his career, which was the last phase of his career, kind of like from the turn of the millennium on. And so I organized a conference panel, and Joel, who I knew from our PhDs, where we both actually wrote about Leonard Cohen when we were writing our dissertations at McGill, I asked Joel if he had something he might want to contribute to that panel, and he gave a great paper, and some of our other contributors were there. And I just thought that the conversation could keep going, especially considering how much attention Cohen was getting after his death. And so I asked Joel if he would like to continue to work with me on that project. And we just took off from there, put together a broader call for papers, and tried to reach as many people as we could to get a variety of perspectives on Cohen, on Cohen's career, and different kind of critical approaches to it, because he is an artist that has had such a long career, but also that it was a career that took shape across many disciplines. And so we felt like we're both literary scholars. We kind of wanted to hear what other people from different disciplines were thinking about him. And I think it was also just inspired by that moment. Cohen's death really coincided with a lot of things happening in the world, including, Trump being elected, and everything felt like some things were beginning and other things were ending, and Cohen became a way for us, or at least for me, to think about through that kind of transition period that we seem to be in.
Yeah, definitely. Joel, anything to add?
One of the prominent examples of Cohen's contemporaneity in our book comes from that moment that Kate just mentioned, which was the election of Donald Trump. And this interesting moment on Saturday Night Live when one of the actors, is it Kate McKinnon?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
where McKinnon sits down playing Hillary Clinton at the piano and sings a Leonard Cohen song. And that song, Kate, which one was it again? I don't even remember.
Hallelujah.
It was Hallelujah.
Yeah.
So McKinnon sings Hallelujah in the guise of Hillary Clinton. And that's meant to express something about the disappointment of a certain portion of the American people, and perhaps also the international public. And I think Kate was right to identify that moment, because it showed how Cohen could speak for the moment, even with a song from the 1980s, even with a song that had been used for so many other purposes. And so that was a sign that there was something going on with Cohen in that moment, 2016, that was not just about his death, but about how he was able to change the landscape of culture in North America.
Mm.
Yeah, maybe it's worth noting too that performance happened right after Trump's election. So it was the following Saturday, but it was also the Saturday that followed Cohen's death. And so it was at once a kind of memorial for Cohen, but also almost a protest song. And that's kind of a fascinating conflation, maybe, of like a long artistic career, and then this like intense political moment. And I think that we both found that kind of inspiring, to think that there was something more to say, even after Cohen's death, about him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you both approached the project with different skill sets. So can you explain how this helped you research Cohen as he applies to contemporary thinking? And Joel, yeah, let's start with you.
My skill set comes from this really the same place where Kate's comes from, which is doing research on literature, especially poetry. But my early focus was on celebrity and celebrity studies in the context of Canadian poetry. And I had done some writing and publishing on Cohen before we started this project, and I guess while we were working on this project. And I really wanted to explore that a little bit more, without losing sight of the literary aspect, which often happens in celebrity studies. It just becomes about media, and I wanted to keep that connected to how writers are representing their own celebrity and dealing with their own celebrity in texts. And I think it probably helped that as this book was emerging, I was moving into genre studies for my second book project, and I was hoping that there would be some interplay, and there wasn't as much as I had expected, but it worked out anyway, because that genre studies helps to. I mean, I was studying the Western genre, but if you think about science fiction, and then like the fan fiction that often emerges around science fiction or fantasy, the whole fandom aspect became important to our contemporary Leonard Cohen book project. And that helped us to close out the book in a way that made sense for me, at least.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was, as Joel said, we both have, our background is in literary studies, but we kind of to come at literary studies, I think, in different and complementary ways. So my research has really focused on philosophical approaches to literature, and I really, understanding how an author's work fits into like a set of philosophical ideas that are circulating in the time that they're writing, but also how literary works or cultural works can amend, adapt, change those philosophical works. So not like there's this philosophical idea and then here it is in the work, but also like how does art respond to these philosophical ideas? And so I think that helped us maybe in some of the conceptualizing of the different ways that we define contemporary. And I certainly was like inspired by just thinking about the contemporary as kind of a philosophical problem. Like, how do you conceive of a contemporary moment, and how do you conceive of that contemporary moment through art? And so different theorists have tried to answer that question in different ways. I mean, Raymond Williams has an answer, Giorgio Agamben has an answer. And so we kind of tried to, I even try to argue that there's an affective answer drawing on Sarah Ahmed. So we tried to kind of theorize the contemporary in a variety of ways. And in that, from my perspective, like Leonard Cohen is a fascinating case because of the diversity of his work. He kind of, troubles easy philosophical definitions. And so he allows you to think really, his work really like allows you or pokes you to think about these problems in like a wide ranging way. And so I think that was interesting. I also think that Joel and I maybe share an interest in interdisciplinarity. So even though we are literary scholars kind of by training, I think a lot of our research is, has this sense of like literature is more than just like the pages in a book, and authors' lives are interesting because of how they fit into a broader cultural picture and other artistic works. And I think that also drove us to also recognize the limitations of our own approaches, and then, do an edited collection versus us just getting together and writing about what we already know, to try to get some experts on musicology, music history, visual arts, and those areas that are really fascinating, but we don't have the same expertise as other people that are working on Cohen. And so that, I think, was part of our editorial principles as well, is to like not try to do something that other people are doing better than we can, but to try to learn from our contributors.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah. And sort of speaking of contemporary thinking, how does that become a lens through which you examine Cohen's career arc?
Yeah, maybe I could get started on a few things. So our book, it's called The Contemporary Leonard Cohen, and it's divided into 3 sections. And so going back to what I was just saying, like the contemporary, that's kind of a interesting idea to think about because it has different meanings for different people. And so we try to consider the various ways that the contemporary has kind of significance in Cohen's career. And what we did was divide the book or the chapters into 3 sections. So we think about the contemporary as an outsider figure, or exile type figure. And that's really drawing on some of Cohen's own writing, but also Giorgio Agamben's notion of the contemporary as being what is like not in keeping with a particular moment. So like not the most popular artist. And Cohen was not always the most popular artist. And then we have a sense of maybe a more common sense notion of the contemporary as like someone who belongs with a group of peers and has contemporaries. So we have chapters about how Cohen fits with other writers of his time. And then finally, we tried to theorize this notion of the contemporary as a kind of feeling, so that you know that you're in the present or you're in the moment when you feel a certain way about it. And so we really looked at, in the last section, we have chapters about how affect and emotion works either in Cohen's works, or how people kind of respond to it, or how it generates or thinks critically about certain feelings. And then behind all of that, maybe Joel wants to say more about this, is this notion of contemporary art, which is another common association. And so we started working on the book at the same moment that there was a huge exhibit in the Montreal Museum of Contemporary Art about Leonard Cohen, and it really situates him as a contemporary artist. And so that was kind of an invitation also to think about him in contemporary in a different way, thinking maybe about periodization and how he fits as a 20th century artist, because the notion of contemporary art is a relatively new one.
Mm-hmm.
If I can follow up on that,
Yeah.
The chapter in the book that really focuses on the art, as in visual art, is Joan Angel's chapter on the self-portraits that Cohen started to include in his last couple of books. And we felt that we needed a chapter like that to show that interdisciplinarity again, that it's not just Cohen using words and being clever about turning some of them into songs and flipping them back into poems and getting it into novels that he's writing, because there are these interconnections between all of those forms, but also his art. And he had a long career and a long interest in art that went all the way back to high school for him. And so we wanted to be some of the first people to consider how that interest in visual art connected to the bigger picture. And for us, in terms of that periodizing that Kate mentioned, the bigger picture had a lot to do with where his edginess went after the 1960s and 70s, when he was labeled, or after which he was labeled, a postmodern writer. And of course, postmodernism is about breaking down borders and boundaries. So it's very open to interdisciplinarity, but he was taking his postmodernism not only in that direction, but also in a countercultural direction, where he was a very much a rebel figure in many ways, who wasn't trying at all to appeal to a mainstream established cultural center or something like that. He was rejecting that, and he was trying to appeal to young people, to bohemian poets, to emerging punk rock musicians, that kind of thing, right? And then all of that changed, and his image, you could say, was cleaned up significantly for that big comeback in the 21st century. And yet, I think that edge is still there. That kind of darkness in his music is still there. So in a little bit more technical language, we were trying to understand how an artist considered postmodern and who is considered to reject so much of mainstream politics and art and everything else, how could that artist not just disappear when the times changed, but how could that artist parlay that stance into something that would last and actually increase his popularity over time, not through controversy, but through other means? And we discovered through the process of writing this book that the concept of the contemporary was the way of answering this question about what happened to Cohen's postmodernism. It was this parallel alongside modernism and postmodernism that turned Cohen's work into something that could last into the 21st century. And that's not so hard to see. Again, to bring this back to visual art, if you go into a museum of contemporary art or a contemporary art gallery, you'll often find very challenging pieces that are usually executed with a kind of polish, not always, but often a kind of polish that suits these galleries with their white walls and their perfect lighting schemes and things like this. And I think that Cohen did something like that with his career. And he probably wasn't the only person responsible for that change. I think he had some guidance from other people, but it really helped him to produce that comeback that defined the end of his career.
Yeah.
I'd like to add for your audience of American librarians that there are a lot of people out there studying postmodern writing, and they're wondering what happened to the postmodern writers? What happened to postmodernism? How did this thing that we thought was so focused on a decade or two, maybe 3 decades, the 60s, 70s, maybe the 80s, where did these writers go? Especially if they had popularity because of the controversies of their postmodernism? Well, one of the answers that our book offers is that the contemporary is the sort of destination that was emerging in parallel with postmodernism through the 60s. And that's an insight that has bearing far beyond Leonard Cohen and could be applied to any number of postmodern writers in the United States and in Canada and in other places.
You just heard from Kate Pinder, Associate Professor in the Department of English and Theatre at Acadia University, and Joel Deshay, Associate Professor of Canadian Literature and Film at Memorial University in St. John's, Newfoundland. Kate and Joel are co-editors of the contemporary Leonard Cohen, Response, Reappraisal, and Rediscovery, recently published by Wilfrid Laurier University Press, which provided support for this series. Join us next week when our guests discuss Cohen's lesser-known and intentionally controversial book of poetry, Flowers for Hitler. They also spotlight Cohen's use of gossip and rumor in his songs, particularly in the context of his relationship with Joni Mitchell. As always, underwriting opportunities for the Authority File podcast are directed by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer, with support from digital media assistant Ashley Roy. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.